Okay, so I'm in the search.ios.js file. So go ahead and create that file and start typing some text. So I want to import this components forecast.ios, and if you're familiar with Node.js, .js is not necessary, so you can use .js, so you don't have to use that as long as you're pointing to the right file. Extension is not necessary. .js will be added automatically, and then I want to add a few more variables here. I want to import alert, which would alert us if the city name is empty, and then the switch which we will use for the toggle to remember or not remember the city name. And touchable highlight is similar to the touchable opacity, but visually they are not similar, but functionally they are similar. So I'm using weather map app ID, so don't use mine, get your own. And actually I'm not using the real API, I will be using the local version, which we will implement it later. So let's start by implementing the search component. I'm just exporting it right away. You can use a variable, assign it to variable, then export that variable. Doesn't really matter. Just style preferences. So first thing, we want to set the state right. We want to see if we can get the city name from the storage. Like, what if you already saved it, right? We must get it so we can display it properly if it's been saved. So let's use that property storage get from storage method, and it's asynchronous. So what we need to do here, we need to implement a callback, which will take city name as an argument, and then if city name is not empty, we want to set the state. So this .set state, and I'm not worrying about this here because I'm using fat arrows, so I'll get the proper context, which is the search component. And then in case I don't have that city name, I'm just setting the state to empty and remember to false. Toggle remembers, that's the handler for our switch, our little switch that will enable us to remember or not remember the certain city name that we've entered. I have the console log basically to give us some help when we are testing it, and then this .set state is remember equals not this .state is remember. So whatever value we had, we will assign a new value to the exact opposite. So if it's false, it becomes true. If it's true, it becomes false. And then in the callback, remember set state is asynchronous. In the callback, I want to check again and get rid of that city name, because if I turned off that switch, if I don't want to remember, right, then I should get rid of the saved city state. Handle city name, it's a handler for the city name input field. Both the switch and the city name, what is called controlled components, so we need to update the values, otherwise they will be stuck. One interesting thing here is that when we actually get the value, when there is a value in the storage, we want to flip the switch. We want to turn the remember to true, because obviously if we have city name saved, that means the previous time is remembered was true, so we need to remember is remember again. Okay, so far so good. But how about actually implementing a search? So when we enter the city name, we want to search for that city and get the forecast, get all the weather data, right? So this is the handler. We get the event as an argument. Not going to really use it. Let is ES6 syntax instead of var. We can use let to respect the logical blocks. I'm just reassigning city name and is remember because I don't want to type this .stay.isCity every time. Okay, so if city name is empty, let's alert a user. Let's say, hey, you actually need a city name if you want to get some forecast for that city. You cannot just leave it blank. If you leave it blank, the weather API will complain because it cannot find it as well. So let's use this alert, and it's cross-platform, it's universal, Android, iOS. so we don't need to worry about it. Just put 3 arguments, and then on press I'm just cancel login because I'm not really interested in doing something. I just want to show that, like, hey, the city's name is empty. Then I'm using Fetch API. It's a new API in JavaScript. Chrome already has it, other browsers not yet as of this recording. And then I'm using this long string using ES6 template string or interpolation again to construct this API URL using app ID and using query q equals city name, and the metrics. The units are metric system, and the method is get. It's a promise, fetch returns promise, so I'm using .then. I'm getting the JSON, response.json, and then in another then, I'm actually checking, okay, if this is remember, if remember is true, if I toggle that switch to, yes, please remember the city name, then let's go ahead and set that in storage, right? You can actually do that outside of fetch, it doesn't really matter. Maybe you prefer to save before you make a request in case the request fails, you want to resubmit that, or I'm doing it inside of the fetch request, assuming the request went successfully, so now we can save that city name. And then I'm creating a data source. We'll use the data source in the list view in the next route, in the next component, which is forecast. So for now, let's just create that and pass it as a property. Navigator.push. Remember, we passed the navigator object to the search, and this is the method.push, how we can render the next route. We can push it to the stack, to the route stack, and we use the same properties, name, component, and pass props. And they're pretty much arbitrary, so Navigator is very customizable. You can, instead of name, you can use title. Instead of pass props, you can use props or something else like data. As long as you change them in both places, that would work. I also want to use the raw forecast data because I want the city name, not just the list of the forecast, so I'm passing both. What's good about promises is that you can have this catch error that will catch error in neither of the then callbacks. So far so good. We have all the handlers, so let's go ahead and implement the render. In the render we need to show a few messages, like just a plain text, and then as well the text input field, the switch, and the search button. So that's what we need to implement. So let's start with using a view. We'll style it properly using styles.container. And then the first text would be just like a heading, the large font size. It would say it's welcome to weather app. It's part of React Quickly book. We can also give some instructions like, hey, enter the city name, please. Otherwise the app is not going to work. Okay, so now we're ready to use text input. It's a pretty cool component because it has a lot of properties, a lot of interesting properties. So placeholder works similarly like you would use it in input of the web HTML or React JSX components. It would output some text when the field is empty. So I'm just using San Francisco as an example. The value, we would assign it to the state, so it's a controlled component. The difference is that in uncontrolled components we don't set the value, but in controlled we set the value. Usually we set it to the state. If we set it to just a static value, it's not going to work, it's not going to change. I like controlled components because this way the representation is always the same as the state. The next property there is specific to React Native, return key type. That's the text on the virtual keyboard. enable return key automatically. That's set to false. So basically, if the text is empty and it's false, you cannot submit it. Could not hit return. Unchanged text, that's our handler. That's the handler that will update the state of the city name. And on end editing, that's when you click the virtual keyboard's return, which will have the text search, that function will be triggered. This .search will be triggered. And then the switch has just two properties on value change. This our toggled remember, and the value state.isRemember. The value is Boolean, obviously true or false. And the last element is touchable highlight, which is a button that says search. You must have text inside of touchable highlight text component. You cannot just use plain text like you would use in React. You need to use a text component with React Native. So that's pretty much it for the form elements. This is our small form. Remember, you need the text input when you're just outputting the text, unlike in Web React. And we also have a few interesting properties for the text input that we didn't have in the web, because there is no virtual keyboard on the web. But these properties will allow us to manipulate that virtual keyboard a little bit. So let's save this file and move to the next one.